Welcome to the More Than Fitness podcast.
And welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Minisode number 115 on the More Than Fitness podcast. Today's Minisode, we are going to talk about how to bust through a fat loss plateau. I think this is the question that so many people have after they have realized their efforts just aren't going anywhere, or their lack of efforts, as we're about to get into. But I think that anybody who's been on a fat loss diet or just a diet in general know how frustrating this process can be. And so I wanted to use my own personal experience and then also the experience that I've had with coaching hundreds of clients throughout the years and kind of distilling that information for you guys in this minisode. So let's get right into it because we have lots of good juicy details in this one. So the first thing that you should do, if you aren't already doing it, is to start tracking, right? It's the whole famous cliche, what gets measured gets managed, right? And I think that you can't know that you're even on or that you even have a fat loss plateau in the first place if you aren't using some type of objective indicators of progress slowing down or stopping or whatever. And so if you don't track certain things, then you don't even know that you're in a fat loss plateau to begin with. You're just like, oh, I want to lose more fat and I'm not losing fat quickly enough, or my diet isn't working because I'm not losing X amount of pounds in so many days or weeks or whatever. And I think that's the mistake that a lot of people can have. What I see sometimes, I saw a tweet literally the other day, and it was a guy who was complaining because he was doing like intermittent fasting. He didn't eat more than like 5 grams of sugar per day. He was walking like 10,000 steps. He was only eating like 2 or 3 meals per day and wasn't eating after 6 p.m. And he was like, and I've gained weight. And it was just so interesting that he went to every single one of these extremes whenever all he needed to really do. The one thing he didn't mention was tracking his food intake. So it's just so weird how I can see people want to throw these Band-Aid solutions or tactics onto their weight loss efforts, only to still be disappointed whenever the thing that they needed in the first place is to understand that total calories for the day drive fat loss, drive weight loss specifically. And if you're not paying attention to that, then you're going to have some issues. Or if you're at least not tracking certain things, then yeah, that's going to be an issue. So if you are going to start tracking, I would use MyFitnessPal, FitGenie, Mike's Macros. Any of these apps are going to be a great starting point to at least gain some initial awareness. And if you want to figure out how to calculate your macros, I won't talk about it here, but just type in on the other minisodes how to calculate macros, and I have a minisode on that for you. So start tracking your food, and then I would also start tracking your weight as well, at least 4 times per week. In the morning, after you use the restroom, and before you eat anything. That's going to give you the most consistent weight measurements throughout the week. And then you take the average of those measurements at the end of the week to get your quote unquote true weight, around your true weight. And then based on tracking your food and then the weight, that's going to give you a good idea. Okay, if your weight's going down, then you're probably eating in a calorie deficit and you're right on track with what you're doing. Which brings us to more so the point that other people listening to this may be at, because they have already done that. They've been tracking for a little bit, and yet they still aren't losing fat the way that they would like. Maybe their weight has stalled. Right. And I think one of the most common things that typically happens is that you're not adhering to tracking as closely as you should. So basically, you need to tighten things up with your tracking. And this can come from little snacks throughout the day, maybe that you aren't tracking, or maybe little bites of things here and there, or maybe that late night snack that you just grabbed right before bed, but then you didn't want to track on your phone. This could be cheat meals on the weekend, quote unquote. This could be cheat days, right? An entire cheat meal can wipe out an entire week of a calorie deficit. So that's something that you need to be mindful of if you're not structuring that appropriately. So yeah, I think that lots of times people track for 4 to 5 days per week, but then it's those other 2 to 3 days that are really shooting themselves in the foot. So my next recommendation would be to take an honest audit of how you're currently doing and see where you need to tighten things up. And I think that you can basically answer this with the question of, if I asked you the question, and I do this with my clients sometimes, hey, where do you think you are slipping up with your nutrition? What do you think we should do to break through this fat loss plateau? Well, then whatever the first thing is that comes to their head, they're like, I've been tracking peanut butter as 1 tablespoon of peanut butter, but it's probably more like 3 or 4, and I do that every single day, right? It's little things like that we don't think make a big difference, but especially in the beginning of a fat loss journey, or whatever you want to call it, these little details are very important so that you have accurate data to adjust from in the first place. And now on the flip side of this, the next thing that I would recommend is that maybe some of you need to restrict yourself less. And whenever I say this, what I mean is during the week, maybe you are in a pretty heavy calorie deficit, right? And you're losing linearly throughout the week. Your weight's going down, and that's exciting you, but you're just barely eating any food, and maybe you're doing more cardio. And then whenever the weekend comes around, you felt so restricted the entire week that you say, screw it, and then you go off your diet, and then the entire weekend you go off your diet, right? And so from that deprivation that you've had during the week, it's causing you to only splurge and binge more on the weekends. And that's really shooting yourself in the foot, because it feels like the majority of the time during the week, you're restricting, you're going hard, you're really buckling down. But then whenever the weekend comes, you splurge, you tell yourself that you've earned it. And then you just kind of go off the rails until Monday rolls around, and then the cycle continues again. So what I would say is to restrict yourself a little bit less during the week so you don't feel as deprived when the weekend comes around. It's like if you have that craving for a pizza in the middle of the week, maybe have a couple pieces or something so that it prevents you from having an entire pizza plus dessert, plus the next morning you go out and get pancakes and donuts and et cetera, right? So keep the restriction to what it needs to be, but not more than it needs to be, right? I think that's important as well. And then one of the last things is to understand the whoosh effect. Some of you may or may not have heard this, but this happens essentially, and I've experienced this with some of my clients, and it can be frustrating for them because they're doing everything right. And so they're hitting their calorie deficit perfectly every single day on what we know is a calorie deficit, because they've been losing weight at this calorie deficit for maybe a week or two, and then their body just stalls completely, right? And so often what can happen is what ends up happening is they're either really stressed out or they've had really poor sleep lately. And what their body can do is it kind of reacts by their fat cells holding water. And the whoosh effect is basically whenever these fat cells decide something triggers it. Typically, it's some type of, it can be some type of higher carbohydrate meal, or just some type of event that allows them to relax a little bit more. And then whenever they relax, then their body decides to release some of that water, right? And that's what the whoosh effect is. It's whenever you've been stalling at the same weight for a certain amount of time, and then you do something that relaxes yourself a little bit, and then you drop, 2 to 3 to 4 pounds overnight. And that's what happens whenever you have a whoosh. And so this can be frustrating because you don't know whenever this is coming, but it's just typically what I would recommend is if you've maintained or if you've been losing weight steadily, and then all of a sudden your weight loss stops, I would take a good look at how your sleep is, how your stress is, and make sure that you are adhering to your diet 100% so that it's not just, one of these cheat meals or something that I recommended or talked about earlier, kind of shooting yourself in the foot. And then it is actually not from an adherence standpoint, but it could be a whoosh effect. And that's whenever I would say to keep sticking to your diet for maybe another 2 weeks. And then if still nothing happens, which would be unusual, then you can maybe decide to take a diet break for about 2 weeks. But I would say stick with your diet whenever you think you might have a whoosh effect coming. Stick with your diet for about another 2 weeks. And then I would probably bet that you'll have that whoosh effect within that time. And then you can carry on as usual. But yeah, if not, that's whenever I would recommend to take a diet break of about 2 to 4 weeks. Let yourself relax a little bit and then continue on with your fat loss as you were. All right. And that is it for how to bust through a fat loss plateau. I know some of this can be confusing. And so if you have more specific questions, as always, feel free to send me an email, send me a DM on Instagram, or if you want me to help you out with this personally, you can always sign up for one-to-one coaching. The link is in the description to do so. All right. And that is it for Minisode 115 on how to bust through a fat loss plateau. Thank you guys, as always, for listening and for watching. See ya.